Welcome. You may be familiar with this story. It's a story of a couple who brought home their newborn daughter. And their little girl, little toddler, insisted that she be alone with her in the room. Made quite a point about having some alone time with her. And parents were a little concerned. Well, why does she want to be alone? Is she going to do something unskillful? And so they allowed her to go in the room, but they kept the baby monitor on. And the little girl says to the newborn, "Remind me where I come from. I'm starting to forget." There's something about that story that's really touching, whether it's true or not. I think we all have some obscure sense of where we came from and something that we forgot. How quickly we become absorbed into this world and believing that this plane is permanent. You become identified with your body, with your thoughts, with your beliefs. And a big part of mindfulness is remembering. The breath practice of anapanasati is remembering the breath, and remembering the breath as a doorway, sati. So it's a big part of the practice, just remembering. And that's remembering the mystery. It's remembering who and what you really are, remembering who and what you really want. And remembering, it takes a certain degree of focus. And it requires a certain degree of energy to stay present to remembering and not get lost into identification. And so while you're here on this human plane, how do you skillfully manage your time while you're here? And the focus of this talk, how do you manage your energy? How do you manage your life force? I'd like to talk a little bit about virya. Virya is related to the word virility. In Sanskrit, vira it's the hero. And this refers to this quality of zeal, of courage. It's kind of the opposite of sloth and torpor and defeatism. And it really lies at the root of this whole allegory of the hero's journey. It's about cultivating the energy and the courage and the vitality to go out there and do what needs to be done in your life. So when it comes to energy, we have this sense of kind of like falling back on false energy. You may know there's a cartoon of these two guys sitting on the corner, shabby clothes, drinking wine out of a brown paper bag. And one guy says, I used to be president of a company. I had a home in Switzerland. I had my own jet. And then I switched to decaf. So we draw on false energy to get us through the day, through stimulants and all that stuff. But what we're exploring here is that deeper sense of vital energy and courage that carries you through this life. We've been exploring the 10 perfections. These can be viewed as kind of an ideal sense of an engaged life. Generosity is this amazing doorway to recognize your interconnectedness. Noticing how the lack of generosity reinforces who you are as a separate self. The second of cultivating virtue is a sense of internal and social justice and the guidelines by which you live your life. The third is around renunciation, around cultivating really deep simplicity so that you're not distracted by worldly things, but you maintain a focus on what truly, deeply, sincerely calls you. We talked about cultivating wisdom and insight, how wisdom and insight help you to see more clearly into the nature of reality, to see what's actually true. And this talk is about cultivating vitality, energy, diligence, and courage, another part of the 10 perfections. So what I'd like to talk about is understanding and getting the reality of the finite and untrustworthy length of your lifespan. No guarantees. The second is to talk about how you can manage the energy, the life force that you have available to you. The third is how to evaluate how you can invest and use your energy in your life. And the fourth, to talk about how you can build vigor and momentum in your practice. So recognizing the finite nature of life is a pretty critical component here. And again, back to remembering. I've had an ongoing love affair with motorcycles since a really, really young age. I got my first motorcycle when I was, I think, 14. When I moved to, after grad school, I moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico. I got a job teaching. And I sold my car and bought a motorcycle. And motorcycling in New Mexico is amazing. Just, beautiful, always clear skies, and a real joy. But one time when I was kind of up in the Northeast Heights, I was sitting at a stoplight, and a car to the lane to the right of me blew through the stoplight, like at 50 miles an hour. I just noticed that. I went on, stopped at the next stoplight. A car pulled up to me, to my right, and the driver rolled down their window. And the driver said, "You have no idea what happened back at that last light." So that car was in your lane. And at the last millisecond, it shifted into the right lane and blew right by you. A little death reminder. Just like that, it would have been over for me. And I remember thinking like, wow, isn't that amazing? I could have died back there. And then I'd say 3 more stoplights, I kind of forgot about it. I was back to being someone on his way somewhere. I think part of spiritual practice is about embracing those little reminders, kind of reminding ourselves of the impermanence of life. And if you think about the reminders in your life, the reminders of your finite life, how many reminders have you had of friends and family who have gotten old, gotten sick, and have died? Pets you've had that have died? Those you know who are working with serious illness? Watching people around you age? Watching your own body age? Sickness, old age, and death are referred to in this tradition as the heavenly messengers. The Buddha allegedly said that when you invite in these heavenly messengers, not just to notice them, but really invite them in and contemplate them, that they have the power of transforming your life because you recognize impermanence. The recognition that your house is on fire. And so if your time is limited, what do you want? What do you want? What roadmap are you going to follow in life? What are the best practices that are going to help you to navigate through this life based on your intention and your calling? It seems like every talk I give, I'm reminding you you're going to die. And that's not meant to be morose, but it's an invitation to ask yourself, what do you want? How do you want to use your time? How are you going to use the life force available to you? So this question of managing energy it's just so interesting to me. As I often mention, I paddle on the Potomac River pretty much every morning that's humanly possible. Right now in the spring with all the snow melt, the river is closed. But as soon as I'm able to, I'll be out there again. I paddle upstream and then I come back with the current. And paddling upstream it's a challenge. And the Potomac River in particular is, it's got lots of challenges. It's pretty rocky. It's got lots of islands. So there's all these different vortex of currents that you have to pay attention to. And I'm out there kind of kneeling on a paddleboard with a bunch of camera equipment. So as I like to say, if I fall over, I may drown, but I will die with my camera equipment held up above the water line. And whenever I take off to head up river, particularly when it's high water, I'm always gauging how much fuel do I have in the tank versus the force of the river. Oftentimes I'll have a cup of coffee before I go, or I'll bring an energy bar or something like that. But it's a very strategic thing. I aim for the eddies behind the rocks. I aim for the best places to kind of traverse against the wide part of the current by angling, by ferrying across. Every now and then, I just have to gut it out. I have to give everything I've got to get to the next place where I can recover and keep moving up. And so it becomes this really interesting process of engaging with total sprint and then times of rest and times of recovery. And of course, it's a great metaphor for life. You only have so much time. You only have so much energy. How are you going to spend it? You may recall a book that was really quite revolutionary in its time called Your Money or Your Life by this fellow, Joe Dominguez. And he talked about how when you try to explore what it means to be financially independent, look at your outgo versus your income. And he was a big, really huge proponent of minimize your needs, maximize your income, and at some point, your income is going to exceed your outgo. So he had this ruthless evaluation he would take you through, like take a look at your salary, how much money you make. And then in addition to the time when you're actually working, factor in your travel time, factor in the costume you have to wear, factor in the sick time you have because of the stress of your job, factor in the time, all the time you're worrying about your job, and then take all those hours and figure that into your salary. And then he talked about how when you figure that out, then you break that down into what he calls LEUs, life energy units. And so I remember a good friend of mine who was making really, really good money. He went through all that exploration, and he realized that if he took someone out to dinner, that was 2 life energy units. And it really helped him kind of realize, is this how I want to be spending my life force, my life energy? So if you have a limited amount of life energy units available to you per week, and you can argue whether that is limited or not, but the question is, where do you invest those life energy units? We have this life force. This is kind of the foundation of our practice, this first and second foundation of energy and vitality. And the question is, how do you build it? How do you grow it? How do you cultivate it? And managing this primal energy is really an important part of the path. We have kind of physical health, which is to really look closely at your activity, your physical activity, your sleep, your diet, your exercise, the quality of rest. As you're navigating up the river of your life, where are the times when you strategically focus and give it all you got, and the times when you strategically rest and recover? And this is, of course, a whole science of exercise physiology right now. It's the balance of challenging yourself, but also recovery. That if you challenge yourself without recovery, you end up harming yourself. But if you focus more on recovery without challenging yourself, then you're not optimizing your life. But then, in addition to physical health, there's emotional health. Of looking at what is it in your life that's between you and feeling alive and vibrant. Your home life, is it harmonious? The intimacy in your life, the meaningful relationships, are they feeding you or are they draining you? I always find it interesting to kind of notice the attitude and the mind of when I was a kid, just, yeah, I'm bored, there's nothing happening. And my parents saying, well, you want to go for a walk? No. You want to play Monopoly? No. Do you want to go out and go to a movie? Yeah. Suddenly energy is up and running. So it's an interesting exploration of what's between you and full, unbridled, energetic expression. Quite often it shows up as doubt. You're doubting yourself, doubting your choices. It shows up as fear or anxiety. What might happen? This is part of the incredible practice of mindfulness, because what mindfulness can do is it starts to reveal everything that's between you and feeling good. It starts to reveal everything that's between you and feeling really alive. So there are these stories of people who've tapped into incredible strength, like, who lift the car off a child. There are these moments of like infinite energy, but chances are you're working with what you've got inside. And so if we really kind of view one aspect of energy, of life force, it's about really looking at how to manage the fuel that you have available to you. And I find it really interesting to touch on something referred to as the 7 factors of awakening. Now, this whole idea of swimming upstream or paddling upstream is a metaphor that was used in the Buddha's time. That if you want to wake up, if you really want to wake up to reality, you're going to be swimming upstream against your conditioning, but also, he pointed out, against the conditioning of the culture. The culture is not so into waking up. It's more around focusing on what you want. Look for happiness through the senses. And if there's something unpleasant, find a way to nuke it or neutralize it. But if you really want to be awake, particularly if you're challenged, just a very brief touch into these 7 factors of awakening, because these are kind of the conditions that allow you to be really present and awake to your life. The first is mindfulness. It's kind of recognizing the phenomena of reality. The second is investigation, the capacity to kind of move to actually really look closer. It's one thing to recognize, for example, let's say you're having a rage attack. Mindfulness is recognizing it. Oh, here it is. Investigation is, wow, let me check this out. What is this experience inside? Now, the third factor here is virya. The third factor is energy. It's the energy required to look at it, but it's also kind of the determination, kind of the courage, like, okay, I'm going to take a look at this. The next is referred to as joy. And my interpretation of this is like, there's a joy of discovery. Like, let me see what's behind this experience of anger right now. Now, the next is relaxation. Now, how could that factor be present? Why is that important? Well, in order to feel, you have to relax. So there's both kind of like the energy, the determination, a sense of the joy of discovery, but also, wow, let me really feel this. Let me really feel this. Let me relax and feel it, which kind of blends right into concentration. Let me stay with it. I'm going to stay with this right now. And finally, equanimity, which is kind of a quality of steadiness. Let me just stay present to this and allow anything to happen. So can you get a sense of the factors that go into sort of deconstructing something that's arising in any given moment? To be able to name it, just to be able to see it, the willingness to get more intimate and investigate it, the determination, the energy to, I'm going to stay with this, and I'm excited about learning about this. So let me like relax a little deeper. Let me feel it a little better. Let me really hone in on staying with this. And at the same time, let me create a sense of spaciousness so I can allow it to shift and move and change. It's a fascinating thing. And what I find is, for myself and certainly for others, that when you're swimming upstream against some challenge, if one of these factors isn't there, then it's not the optimal condition. If you can't be mindful, if you're just sort of scattered into reactivity, it's going to be very, very hard to stay present. If you're not willing to get intimate with what's happening, if you don't have the firepower, if you're not that interested, if you can't really soften into it, and if you can't stay focused, and if you can't move into preferenceless awareness, it's not going to be really very fruitful, perhaps. So this becomes an interesting factor. I just heard a noise outside, and it might be a truck. I mean, it is a truck. I just don't know what truck it is. So what do we do with the energy? Well, first, what happens is the more you stay present to what's between you and feeling free, what's between you and feeling more and more alive, the more you start to become aware of all these different elements. One of these elements has to do with greed, wanting it different. Another element has to do with hatred, with kind of pushing away. And a third has to do with delusion, which is simply not seeing clearly. But when you can call on determination, when you can really foster the life force, that you can really swim upstream in your life, there are three things you're doing. First, you're developing your character. You're cultivating the sincerity, the focus, the desire to be awake. You're also developing your practice. You're developing skill sets. And it's really, really critical, because the more you practice mindfulness, and that could be in a broad or very specific sense, the more you realize that different tools are appropriate at different times. You realize that there are times when the mind is scattered, so you need to draw on concentration and focus and calming. That there are times when it's really helpful to take this stance in meditation of being kind of the open monitor, building your capacity to simply rest in preferenceless awareness. And then there are times when it's very, very skillful to just allow things to be. And there are times when it's important to investigate, to practice the rain technique, for example, or to call on loving presence as a way of staying present to something difficult. All these skillful means begin to become part of your repertoire. And then there's a third quality. Beyond just developing your character and developing your skill set, it's around practicing in order to serve others. Recognizing that the more you calm yourself, the more you are available to others. The more you cultivate compassion, the more that compassion is available for others. Back to that beautiful line from Thich Nhat Hanh, who says, when one person in the boat is calm, the rest of the boat will be calm. So it's being that calm one in your boat. And so again, it comes down to, what's your goal? Like, what are you wanting? What's the star by which you're navigating your life? And then what are the practices? What is it that's going to support you in moving toward that which is most important, when you have that sincere sense of what you want? What feeds you? How do you fill your cup? There's a beautiful story a writer was sharing about. He was a professional writer, And the doctor at the birth of his child was talking with him afterward. It was a challenging birth, but the doctor kind of explained what he did. It was like an emergency procedure. He did it. And as they were chatting, this doctor said, "So, what do you do?" He said, "Well, I'm an artist and I'm a writer." And the doctor said, I really wish I had gone that path of being an artist." And the writer said, "Well, it seems like, in your profession, you just saved my child's life by knowing what to do so skillfully. That's an art unto itself, isn't it?" And the doctor said, yeah, it went well in there, and I can tell you why. Because I woke up early and I played Chopin for an hour. I love that story because it really brings up this inquiry around what is it that feeds you? I use this analogy a lot, and maybe I overuse it, from that line, my cup runneth over. The times when you're so filled with energy and goodwill that being nice is effortless, being empathic is easy. You're not reactive, you're more responsive. And the question is, what is it that fills your cup? I really believe that an integral inquiry around spiritual practice, if you will, whatever that means, is whatever it is that truly fills your cup so it's overflowing. When people say yoga, meditation, so narcissistic, my response is, your responsibility is to fill your cup. Whatever it is that helps you to fill your cup to overflowing, that really is the practice. And so we have this inquiry around asking, what is it that fills your cup? What is it that gives you the energy to keep on going? Kind of back to paddling on the river, one of my favorite things is going up less than a third of a mile upriver are two nesting eagles. They've been there for the last many years, and watching the eaglets when they're born and how they start poking their heads up, and then they start standing, and then they stand on the edge of the nest, and then there's a time period where you can see them kind of in their teenage years. They're wanting to be in the world, but they're not quite ready for it. And so what they do is they just stand at the edge of the nest and they flap their wings. They kind of pretend flying, but they're not ready to fly. And in fact, if you've ever noticed that the eaglets look bigger than the adults, that's because they're born with these pinion wings that help them to learn how to fly easier. And then when they molt, those pinion wings fall away, and then they come in with a full kind of white plumage and so forth. So it's kind of like training wheels or training wings. And I remember once I was paddling upriver, and I'm always eager to kind of check out where they are. And after a while, these eaglets start hopping from branch to branch. And then I saw this brown bird down kind of deeper in the foliage. And I realized that what had happened was this eaglet had sort of hopping from branch to branch. It either had fallen or it flew to a lower branch and it wasn't able to fly up. And I just kind of felt sick for it. I know there was nothing I could do, but we kind of have this idea of a Disney moment, when the orchestra swells and the breeze comes and the bird flies and everything is perfect. That's not that way. It's little hops and little risks. It's just about playing an edge. And this eaglet had maybe kind of pushed it a little far. But I'm happy to say that somehow, it was able to kind of hop its way back. But I remember like thinking about that eaglet through the night, is it going to be okay? But this is the life force kind of pushing through the eaglet. It wants to be alive. It's designed to take risks. It's designed to kind of push the edges. That's what makes it stronger. And when you think about it, or when I thought about it, it was like, how many times have I done incredibly dumb stuff in the name of testing my own skills? And Jack Kornfield has this great line. He said, if there are adolescent males around, the primary inquiry is there anything life-threatening we can do around here? I could cringe at the crazy stuff that I've done with whitewater paddling and kayaking and climbing and motorcycling and hiking and all kinds of stuff. But we're drawn to that edge. We all have an edge we're drawn to. And when you think about the growth in your life, how many times have you gone to an edge and had to dig deep? And how many times when you're on that edge do you feel like you're alive? In yoga, we have this term where you kind of go to a posture and you go to that place where it hurts good. It's like it's not pleasant, but there's something about that unpleasant that is good for you. And so it becomes a real question of like, what is your edge right now? Is there something in your life that's really challenging? That's kind of what I like to think of as what you can't not do. We're going to dive into a little inquiry that in a little bit. But beforehand, I'd like to talk a little bit about, there's a really interesting book called Anti-Fragile. And it's about embracing the edges in your life. That when you really, really want something, you've got to pay something for it. You've got to sacrifice something for it. And this is about that edge. If you want to be more happy in your life, if you want to be more awake in your life, what are you willing to sacrifice for it? There's a wonderful non-dual teacher who I get a lot of inspiration from, and he talked about this. Like if you really want to be awake in your life, there are a number of factors. One of them is sincerity, to know in your heart, this is what I truly, deeply want. And then there's this sense of resilience, of focus, of staying with it. Knowing that just like you're on the river where you've got to focus, but you also have to rest and conserve and manage your energy. That's kind of what this comes down to. What do you really want? How do you manage your energy and your courage to stay on that edge? So you can maybe get a sense of how, when you're managing your energy, if you have a lot of energy but no direction, there's some serious challenges here. You can end up going down a lot of rabbit holes. I think I mentioned earlier this kind of curse, may you be successful when you're young. When we know all these stories of destruction that can occur. If you have a lot of energy with no awareness, it may be that you are striving and running after things you don't really, really want. And in fact, most of our life force is about striving for what we don't really want. There was Hegel who said everything we do is designed to help us ease our anxiety. So we spend most of our time chasing after either fame, praise, to be successful, or we're striving to avoid pain and to avoid failure and to avoid shame. I think spiritual maturity is about knowing what you want and then economically and strategically moving in that direction. If you don't know what you want, we're just going to be bouncing around from the desire for gain, the fear of loss, the desire for fame, the fear of shame, the desire for pleasure, the fear of pain, the desire for success, the fear of failure. And the key seems to be about slowing down. Just like in concentration practice and meditation, you begin again and again, this moment, here and now. If we don't learn to slow down, the same lessons appear over and over again. So many people who share about their challenges in practice will share, why is it that when I feel like I'm getting happy, things collapse? Or why can't I ever find the right partner? Why do I always feel so sad? Why is there this constant gnawing anxiety everywhere I go? Slowing down, pausing, seems to be the key. If a belief was driven into you as a young child, you weren't good enough, chances are you're going to act that out until it's possible to take the time to feel the consequences of that, to bring compassion to that, and to integrate it. And that's the magic of this practice. It takes such vigor, energy, and courage to stay on this path, to stay in this constant process of swimming upstream, learning how to pause, learning how to rest, learning how to navigate the path is the path. And what happens is, I'm pretty sure, is that the more you practice, the more you can begin to build momentum. I was practicing with Sokni Rinpoche, a Dzogchen teacher, and did a couple of weeks with him, and was having some mind-blowing experiences with the particular techniques that he was offering. And I had the chance to ask him a question, and I said, I told him about my background, but I said, if I do these practices, what can I expect? His answer surprised me. But the more I reflected on it in the years since, the more I really got the wisdom in that. He said, the more you practice, the more you will gain confidence. The more you will begin to get for yourself that you have the power and the capacity to be with anything. And that's what happens is when you develop momentum. And there is a certain kind of momentum in this practice. I was with someone recently who was beginning to identify in her practice how much she was just dreading social situations. And she realized that every time she was in a social situation, she'd feel drained. She was like putting out all this energy, trying to present herself as a good person, and afterwards she was so dissatisfied. And she said, I put out all this energy, but no one really seems that interested in me. I remembered a quote from Werner Erhard, who said, "Do you think anyone notices you? They don't. They're so consumed with how they think people are noticing them, they're not really paying attention." I shared that with her, and I think there's a reality to that. And she felt a little more freedom. And we had this inquiry of like, well, how could this be fun? If no one really cares, if no one's really seeing you, what would it be like if that wasn't an issue? And she just sensed how much more freedom she would have. If that wasn't an issue, there's a certain kind of aliveness. And we talked about some ways that she might be in social situations. As a classic introvert myself, I shared some of my things, which is like, go for one-on-ones, go for high quality one-on-ones. Ask questions that move the conversation deeper, that can be more satisfying. Oftentimes when we are resisting, there's something that we can explore on the inside. quite often where we tend to lose energy is where we get caught in conflict. Something inside wants something, something inside doesn't want something. But if we can begin to identify where the resistance is, sometimes that frees up not only a mental quality of freedom, but actually a kind of a primal energy. If you think, let's do a little reflection. We have a little bit of time left. If you like, you can close your eyes. And you might take 3 slow, deep breaths. And you might just take a moment to reflect, just something in your life that you're resisting, something you're maybe a little bit of dread, something in your life where you can feel your energy drain. And you might just take a few moments just to kind of sense what it's like, get a little more familiar with it. What does it feel like inside when you think about this? Is there a sense of what you're believing about this situation? And is there a sense of who you might be without that belief? Is there any kind of attitude shift that might open up some new possibilities? A sense of what you might need to kind of play this edge a little bit. And if you like, you can deepen your breath. If you like, you can open your eyes. And that was kind of a very, very quick reflection, but noticing where you're losing energy, where you feel kind of the drain of energy. You really have 2 options. One is to change the externals. The other is to work on the internals. Is there an attitude adjustment that might be helpful? Something you're believing, some operative belief that maybe it's not true. A sense of what you might need to kind of stay with that edge. Oftentimes I find when I'm with people, what they identify as anxiety, when they really investigate it, there's a very fine line between anxiety and excitement. Very, very fine grain difference. But I notice sometimes when I'm feeling anxious, if I can sort of just be with the primal feeling of it, that there's something kind of enlivening. There's some aliveness around new possibility that could be really quite interesting. Here's a short reading, an autobiography in 5 short chapters. Chapter 1, I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I'm lost. I'm helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. Chapter 2, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place. But it isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it is still there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately. Chapter 4, I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5, I walk down another street. This is the path, swimming upstream, paddling upstream. I love the phrase, which I know I've shared before many times, the mantra, which I think is kind of the bottom line, and that is to keep going. When you feel stuck, when you feel lost, keep going. When you think you've arrived, definitely keep going. And I really believe that the more you practice, the more you will find yourself developing more and more confidence in the practice itself and in the resilience that you have inside. There's a beautiful concept of the vicious cycle. Something happens, you have the same reaction over and over and over again. But there's also something called a virtuous cycle. Something happens, you pause, you respond skillfully. That becomes a spiral, and you begin to spiral upward. There's some beautiful, beautiful teachings on virya if you want to do more research. So much more I could talk about here. A lot of it has to do with really knowing the star by which you are navigating, knowing your deepest intention, and cultivating both that sincerity, that hunger, along with the resilience and the courage to stay on the edge. It has to do with knowing when to give yourself fully without holding back, and knowing when to pause, knowing when it's skillful to rest. This only comes through practice. I remember many, many years ago, when I was president of a pretty big nonprofit, and one of the board members took me aside. He said, "You're making some really dumb decisions." I said, I know. I'm doing my best, but how do I make better decisions? He said, by making really dumb decisions. This is part of practice. You give yourself to it fully, you apply yourself, and then you really evaluate, is the result of this skillful? Is the result of this more wholesome? And so when you assess your energy, it's so helpful to look at what gives you energy, what drains your energy, to really look at what's draining you. Is there a way that it could be a gain if you were to shift your attitude? And ultimately, it comes down to, what do you really, really want? Why do you want it? Because the why opens you to your passion. And what are you willing to give in order to move toward what you most want? So you might like to close your eyes. We're going to take just a few moments here before we close. Taking a few long and slow deep breaths. And I'd like to offer just a few questions, a few inquiries that I find really helpful for opening to a greater sense of aliveness in your life. That tend to kind of free up energy and provide more fuel for your practice. So you might take 3 slow breaths, if I didn't say that already. And take a few moments just to reflect on the following questions. What are you most grateful for in your life right now? When you reflect on this, what does that feel like inside? What are you most excited about in your life right now? What do you love? Any practice worth its salt, I believe, is filled with paradox. If you like, you can deepen your breath and you can open your eyes. This practice calls for deep relaxation and softening and sensing what's here. At the same time, it calls for cultivating courage, cultivating that kind of virility that helps you to stay present. It calls on a very, very deep capacity for intention and knowing what you want and applying yourself. It also calls for this quality of deep surrender and allowing. Ultimately, the only path there is the path you're on. And the more you continue to give yourself to that which is most important, the more I truly trust that what will be revealed is a greater sense of confidence, a greater sense of verified faith in pursuing that which you most want in your life. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I love these practices, and I'm so happy to be able to share them with you. Many, many blessings, and happy, happy trails.